Okay, my name is Kelsi Sharp, and I run Sharp Sign Company, and right now life is very, very busy and very, very good. I feel really inspired. So right now we are in my workshop space, which is in the basement of my sign shop, which is on Lake Street in East Minneapolis. Upstairs there's a public facing storefront, and then downstairs is where I do a lot of fabrication and sign preparation in advance of going out on an install. So I've been in the process of like acquiring this space for a very, very long time. I share the space with two studio mates. Like a big part of moving into this space to me was like just that conscious like leveling up and kind of being at a space in my career where I knew I wanted to continue to do this so I could actually feel comfortable to like pursue getting a small business loan to make this space a real level up for me from the world of like hobbyist, maker, side hustler into the world of like being really dedicated into this craft. Actually like do the technical skills that were needed is something that I've like learned from a lot of different fabrication spaces that I've been a part of in Santa Fe and in Minneapolis, and just kind of like asking a lot of questions, failing and experimenting a lot. I feel like a big resource for me has just been like very patient older craftspeople who have taught me a lot. One of the first people that introduced me to the trade of sign painting is one of my best friends, Augustine, who runs Magic 8 Ball Signs, and he's the one who went to LA Trade Tech and studied sign painting, and he's still someone who like to this day I call him with like questions, or like I'll like FaceTime him on a job site like, is this enough opacity, is this too painterly, should I like go back to gray, and like it's really, really sweet to have that relationship. And then here in Minneapolis, there's a few sign painters that I definitely like love and respect. Forrest Wozniak is a dear friend now, but definitely just someone who, when I first moved here, I was kind of like chasing to introduce myself to, of like, hi, I'm new here, I'm painting signs, like I would like to like make your acquaintance, and can I buy you a beer? And now it's just developed into a relationship where oftentimes I will like support him on an install, or have him come by and check my work at a job site, or truly just like grab a beer and talk shit. And then another guy is Phil Vandervaart, who's painted a lot of the signs around here in this area of Minneapolis. So it's really cool to be like, living and working in his shadow. He like lives right down the street too, and is just an incredibly talented sign painter. Both of those guys have really defined the trade in Minneapolis on a business level and on like a stylistic and aesthetic level. And then another person who I've studied with is Mike Meyer, who is from Minnesota but actually doesn't live here anymore. So in January I went and studied with him for a while and learned about gold leaf as well, which is also something really interesting to me. And then there's also a female sign painter named Leanne Barker, who is in Australia, who I've studied with a lot during the pandemic. I have like learned and grown so much that I've learned how much more I still need to learn and grow. So I'm kind of in this place where I kind of just want to like shut the fuck up and reflect, and also continue to learn, like really, really taking that backseat position to all of the teachers that are available to me right now, because I feel that urgency of like they're not going to be available to me for very long. Like, these people are retiring, these people are dying, it's a pandemic, it's a very tragic world, everyone's circumstances are changing constantly. So a big thing for me in the future is just to continue to learn. And I really think of myself, like I hope to think of myself as like a documentarian and a historian of this trade and of this craft first, and then a person who practices this craft. I have moved to a new city where I didn't know but a few people, like several times in my life, so I feel totally comfortable and confident being in that setting. Like I spent a summer working in Chicago where I didn't know anyone, and then I spent time in all over Texas, like in Dallas and San Antonio, and then, you know, most recently moving to Minneapolis. And I don't know, I just think like socially I've just like had really good luck, I guess. I've just like always like landed in the right spot. And I think too, I'm like really outgoing, and I think that like I'm okay with like a bit of like discomfort. It's like it was actually me putting myself out there that got me client work. So when I first moved here, I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a single client, and I did a little bit of like gig-based work through, you know, recruiting agencies in town, which allowed me to see the landscape here, which was dope, but not for me. And then the biggest thing that actually really did stick for me was literally just going to like museums and galleries and meeting people, and going to like, you know, different events and meeting people. And it sucked a little bit because it was like I'm lonely and I'm uncomfortable, and I'm like having to put myself out there, you know, Thursday through Sunday, you know, every night, like going to these things, but I don't necessarily feel like it. But I literally didn't have any money or any work, and it worked really, really well. I really think that for me, it's just like that in-person thing, you know, that seems to stick. And yeah, even during the time that I've been here, I think in previous cities, same thing. I've just kind of like, you know, lived in different districts. So not being afraid to like, you know, totally change up your housing situation, because it's like really inspiring and just like interesting to live where I live now, which is way more industrial, and, you know, near a lot of other working artists, or where I lived before, which was much more metropolitan, living near all of the breweries and bars and that kind of stuff, which was like also really important to me as someone who was dating in a new city, to be able to like walk to all these different bars and restaurants and galleries and museums. Coming from a background of never having any money, it was like hard to even think about what would my life be like if I had money, if I could make decisions not based on the fact that, not motivated by money at all, which is like a very, very liberating place to be. Just like, what do I actually like if I'm not just like trying to make $1 today? So I applied for a small business loan, and the one thing that I did before applying was to hire an accountant, because I had pretty much always just done my own books, and I just really wanted to have an accountant, make sure everything was in order, and for them to tell me like, what do you see when you look at this, so that I'm not hearing it for the first time from the loan officer, and then I'm like looking stupid or feeling ignorant, you know. It's just like, I want you to tell me like, what do you see when you look at my books? And so based on the conversations that I had with the accountant who was helping me prepare my application for the loan, I knew that I was good to go. And I already knew that I was good to go because the business had been making gains every year. But yeah, I just think it was helpful to have a second set of eyes. I do think that we should like name numbers. It was like the loan was for like $50,000, right? So one day I woke up and it was like I had $52,000 in my bank account. So, you know, like, yeah, it did make a huge difference, and it goes very, very fast, you know. But I think just being able to, it allowed me to now be in a position where, I mean, I think it was a huge game changer, because just being able to, you know, buy, for example, $10,000 worth of product that I can now be reselling, it changed it to where now it's almost like $50,000 is nothing to me. I mean, it's not nothing to me, but it just means so much less to me, because I see how being able to have that money to scale my business allowed me to scale my business. So, you know, now, like, you know, it's just allowed me to play on a different size of like tennis court, to where a lot of my clients, there's like, you know, more and more frequently I will have projects that are $10, $15, $20,000 projects. So it doesn't mean quite as much. But before I'd gotten it, it was pretty common that like a project fee would be like, $2,000 to $5,000. So it just allowed me to play in a different size arena, which is really, really dope. But yeah, it also goes really fast. And I kind of knew that it would, and I kind of knew that that's how I am. So I just like made sure to, make all of the purchases that I needed to. A big part of that was, stuff for the build out here and the equipment that I needed. And then another thing that we talk about all the time is just like, there's all these like little expenses that you don't even think about. So like the laser was probably like $19,999. So it's like you don't want to apply for like a loan for $20,000. I feel like growing up in the Southwest is a very, very big part of my identity, because I do just feel like so much of my formative years was surrounded by this kind of like aesthetic of like Route 66, and also just like very historic zones, and as well as also the culture of that place, of like thinking of an artist as a blue collar profession rather than a white collar like capital A artist. It's kind of like just that kind of like, ooh, like instead of being like I will paint something and my pinky is out because I am painting it with my beret on and listening to classical music, it's like we might have some cheap beers, we might just kind of like, like buy some paint, we might steal the paint if we don't have the money, just kind of like that kind of culture of like, I'm gonna make something beautiful, and just kind of like really being inspired by the culture of the Southwest, which is like things aren't too precious. Like we are just like, even at this age, just like, like shithead teenagers, it's just kind of like, I'm really into that culture. So I try to bring that with me to, now in the Midwest, people are like very reserved, and that's like the clients and like my other like creative collaborators and stuff. But it's like I still just try to like bring that like, that energy to the meeting. Like, I had a meeting at that laboratory yesterday, and it's like I'm gonna like pull jokes, and I'm gonna like say the like don't say it, and I'm gonna say the thing, and just like be really, really playful, because that's just like a big part of like the culture that I grew up in. And then I think also a big part of the culture that I grew up in is like growing up in foster care. So like before I was adopted, I had like 11 foster care placements, and I think that just like really allowed me to feel comfortable with this constant like changing environment, to the point where I actually find it like really, really inspiring to have my environment constantly be changing. So even when I'm talking about, I've only lived in Minneapolis for 3 years, and I totally lived in like 3 different like defined districts, and that's felt really good to me. And yeah, I kind of want to continue that kind of evolution. I also feel like the signage here is very historic in a totally different way. Like this is like, this is like an industrial center, with like historic grain mills, historic breweries, and just like all of that type of signage, and that legacy of like architecture, stonemasonry, printing presses, paper factories, all that type of stuff has influenced my aesthetic. And I think it's also like been something that I've gravitated towards, because like it is like a little bit more blue collar as well. It's very humbling, because I actually feel like it was like every contract I was signing was bigger and better than the last one. I was like, I'm too busy. Like this is like, life was really, really good. And then I definitely lost like some of my biggest contracts right at the beginning of the pandemic. And for me, it was kind of like, for a while, I just like, I didn't do anything. Like I literally just didn't do anything. And then I just kind of went through this whole mental exercise of like, okay, so you're saying you're a homegirl. So you're saying there's no job that you're too good to do. So you're saying you're not going to be out here hungry and idle like those other people. Like, what do you actually do? If you're saying all those things. And so for me, that was like driving DoorDash. And it was just like I did what I had to do. And I mean, I think it was like incredibly embarrassing, humiliating, and also like just very humbling. And it was like, and you are a homegirl. Like you can still like make money off of the labor of your back on that day. Like, you know what I mean? You're not working. I'm never going to be in a place where I'm working with assets that are so intangible that I can't sell everything right now and make $2,000, you know? So I think the thing that I like about like making signs is like I can just go out and like get that next sign. But when that wasn't an option for those like few weeks, months in there, it was like, so, you know, what are you going to do for money? And like the answer is like literally like whatever you have to, you know? And yeah. I think at the time it was like not something that I talked about, because I think one of my biggest fears was that one of my clients would see me driving DoorDash and it would devalue the work that I did as a sign maker. Like they would be like, oh, well, like you should just be happy to have this sign, like $500 for the sign, you know? So I kind of was fearful how the client perception would be. I was also fearful of like on a social level what like the perception of my friends would be. So it was like I really didn't want like my friends to be worried about me that I was struggling, and so it wasn't like something that I like shared with a lot of people at the time, but like my friends who lived in the same building with me obviously knew, and it was actually like a really interesting exercise in terms of like finance and business, because the project that I was talking about where I got the piece of equipment that I needed to do the project had happened in January. So I spent like $3,000 to buy a new piece of equipment that I needed to do the project. So then when the pandemic hit in like March, it was like, you might not have any money, but you have the equipment you need to go out and make that next sign, instead of what I had been doing previously, outsourcing that work. So it was like you owned that thing outright. It was like a really interesting exercise in like ownership and thinking about, do I have the right tool for the job, or do I have the tools that I need, or do I just have the tools that like my ego has dictated to me that I should buy. The way that I am is I'm just so already like curious about what's next. So it's like I want to get a bigger loan, I want to buy commercial property, I want to own more equipment. I want to run a sign shop that is, on the one hand, a really big part of what I am interested in doing is upholding, you know, all of these old world traditions and techniques, and then on the other hand, the really interesting part for me is also being a sign shop that's known for innovating, you know, having access to the latest technology, being really curious, experimental, and pushing the boundaries of what signage can be and how we can like brand the built environment in new and interesting ways, other than just like, you know, put a vinyl logo on the front door of your business.